The robotics industry is booming, especially with robot house cleaners. Over the past 3 years, the technology has become more and more affordable, and more brands are making more and more versions of this new technology. And one of the most well-known brands in the industry is Roborock. But which Roborock should you buy? Because they do 10, 15 different varieties of robots. Well, I've gone and got my hands on 3 different options to compare the features of each one to find out which one you might want to get for yourself. Now, on the more budget side of things, I've got the Q Series QV35S, then smack bang in the middle of the range, I've got the Q Revo Curve 5S, 5 the Q Revo Curve S5X, and then right at the tippity top and the pinnacle of Roborock tech, I've got the Saros 10. But believe me, there's a lot more to it than just the price when it comes to deciding which one might be for you. So let's start with the main functionality of all of them, which is vacuuming. As expected, when we go up the scale from the least expensive to the most expensive, the power gets stronger. The QV35S, which from here on in I'm going to refer to as the 5S because you can be sure as hell that I'm not saying QV35S every single time I mention it, starts at 10,000 pascals, which although is at the lower end of the scale for all the vacuums I've got on here, is actually a really strong metric. Moving up to the Curve S5X, which from here on in I'm going to be calling simply the Curve for the reasons above, the pascals jump considerably to 18,500 pascals, which is a pretty big jump. And then the Saros 10, which you guessed it, will be called from here on in the Saros. It goes wild with 22,000 pascals, which is some significant suction, not just the highest in today's comparison, but among the highest suction in the industry. For those of you who might just have smooth wooden floors or stone floors like me, then a lower suction is fine. But the greater suction power of the Curve and the Saros benefit those who want to use this on more carpeted areas, and especially who might have high pile rugs, because the additional suction can help bring the debris out of the tassels into the onboard bin, which incidentally is slightly different on the Saros than the other two, likely down to the differences in the mopping system, which I'll come on to shortly. Now, it's not just the suction power that's different between the models. The Curve and the Saros have another slight edge over the Q Revo in the design of the main brush. On the 5S, it's a single traditional cylindrical brush sat in the main motor. The Curve and the Saros both have a dual system where the brush is actually separated in the middle. If you've got a hairy boy like I do living with you, oh, it's a big boy, yes you are. Oh. Have a kiss? Nah. Or if you've got particularly hairy women living in the house, you're going to want to take notes here, because the system in these two with the split brush is fantastic at reducing tangles. Now, I often find that with straight brushes, like on the Q Revo, once every few weeks I'm dismantling everything to remove the copious amounts of hair that gets tangled around it, and I can assure you that it is absolutely evidential that it's not me that's causing that particular problem. But what having a tapered split brush does is force any hair it picks up towards the centre, and then because of the split it can suction that hair straight into the actual compartment. It's objectively a much better vacuum brush system, so like I said, if you have pets, this will be a massive factor in which one of these that you decide to go for and is most suitable for you. Now, one of the ways that the Curve and the Saros differ with the main brush is that both can retract up into the body, which is great for multi-room cleaning. So you can set it to clean a living room and kitchen in the same cycle, and the kitchen might have wet spills that you don't want the main brush to touch, so they automatically detect this and retract inside the body so they don't get wet. And with the Saros 10, it can do that with the side brush too, bringing it up and into the body when it's not needed, which is something that the Curve can't do. Although with that said, the Curve and the Saros both have the ability for the side brush to reach out of the main body to clean corners and edges far more effectively than a fixed system on the S5. It's not that a fixed system is bad, of course. It's been that way ever since the very first robot vacuums ever released, but this new system of robotic arm has taken it to the next level with these two. Incidentally, the design of the brush is the same on all three, but it's slightly different to the rest of the industry with this kind of windswept design that looks a little offset and lopsided, but it's actually designed as such to minimise hair tangling. Now, not only is the main brush system different between them, but the mopping systems have very different functionalities too. The mopping system between the 35S and the Curve are more similar than this one. Both of these use a rotating mopping pad to buff the floor clean, but there are some differences between these two, one of which is similar to the front side brush in that the Curve can actually outstretch its pad and get that effective edge cleaning. The S5 has a fixed system, so whilst it can do the edges because they do go over the lip of the robot ever so slightly, it will never be quite as good as the Curve's extending arm functionality. It's not the only moving element that the Curve has over the 35S. The Curve is capable as well of retracting the pads up towards the body, which makes it better for houses where there's a number of varying floor types between solid and carpeted floor. And one little feature which stops your priceless rugs from accidentally being mopped. Now, aside from the movement of the arms, the mopping is very similar, but what isn't similar, however, is how the base station actually deals with the mops. On the 35S, it just washes and air dries the mops, which is good, and about as much as you'd do with any normal manual mop. But the Curve takes it to the next level, however, because it introduces washes with 75-degree water. This is a much better system, as almost all bacteria is halted above 60 degrees. So if you want the cleanest possible experience from your mopping, the Curve is the better choice by far, just for this one feature. But what about the Saros? Well, here's where things get a little interesting, because the Saros sees a return of a technology that I thought we'd seen the back of, with a vibrating mopping plate instead of mopping pads, or my usual favourite, a mopping roller. Except they've updated the pad quite a bit. One of the reasons I think that brands moved away from this style is because it's very restrictive. You couldn't really do edge cleaning very easily, and lifting it up out of the way was more difficult to do because it was a much larger pad. So on and so on. Well, Roborock have brought it back with some rather unique solutions that puts it easily on par with the rotating style mops. For starters, there's now a side mop, which is always there and positioned to the side of the robot rather than the rear, making this the most effective and efficient of the three for edge mopping, and a unique solution to the lack of edge cleaning in other styles of this vibrating pad mopping system. It's also capable of lifting up towards the body like the Curve to be better on working multiple surfaces and materials. Now, one additional thing that it can do because of this design is actually go back to the station, detach the mop entirely, leaving it in the station to do a complete vacuum-only cycle. Now, there's not many robots that can do this, but it's the ultimate ease of use system to mitigate your carpets from getting damp, however slightly, and unarguably the best system for avoiding this, with the added benefit of making the experience much more intervention free. Now, the base station also uses even hotter water at 80 degrees to wash those mops, so an even more powerful system for those looking for more power in the mopping. So that's the mopping and the vacuuming functions across all three, and there's a lot of differences with the functionality that already starts to paint a picture for which one you might find most suitable for your particular needs. But the differences don't stop there, because I want to now talk about traversal and movement. Now, the 35S is very much your standard style robot vacuum. It finds its way around using a combination of sensors and the typical nav hat on the top, and that's kind of the end of the story, other than the onboard AI and obstacle avoidance. The Curve, however, adds something that Roborock call their adapter lift chassis, which lets the robot essentially lift its entire body up off the floor to aid climbing over high pile rug boundaries or even small lips and height differences in floors. It's a very useful technology to make sure that your robot can clean as many spaces in your home, and something that ultimately different brands will tackle in slightly different ways. But this is the first time that I've seen it quite like this, where the wheels raise up the entire robot, both in the middle and on the front. Now, the Saros also has this adapter lift technology, but a little addition in that it gives a significant edge over the Curve. Obviously, with the Curve, raising the entire chassis off the ground increases its height, which might not be ideal if you've got lots of furniture. It could impede its ability to go under it. Well, the Saros, if you hadn't noticed, can also lower its nav hat directly inside the body, with the LiDAR still peeking out of the rear of the device here through a little window. So you've got 100 degrees of LiDAR navigation even when the nav hat is down, which functionally is a very well-engineered bit of design and something that other brands haven't been able to do. Often their nav hat is in the middle and just sinks away and disappears. But it also means that when it doesn't need to lift itself up, it's capable of becoming the slimmest robot of the three, so it can fit underneath furniture that's a lot lower, thus making the Saros one of the most versatile robots that Roborock do to fit into places that the rest of the lineup just simply can't manage. Incidentally, the adapter lift chassis on this aids with the mopping because it can raise the front up to apply more pressure on the rear and consequently apply more pressure on the mopping system so that the vibrating plate can buff the floor harder and more effectively. Now, when it comes to the AI navigation, the Saros again takes a big edge over the others with the fact that it's got onboard processing and additional sensors on the front and side of the device, offering a much wider obstacle avoidance than the other two. So we've covered a lot of the core functionality differences between the three. Do you know, we might as well just take a quick look at the base stations too. But aside from the obvious design and static differences, there's not a lot different really. They all sort of perform the same functions. They take dirt from the robots, put it into the dust bags, and they all fill up the robots with water and wash the mops on the robots. And as I've already mentioned, the Curve and Saros both use hot water mopping, which is better for the mops. They take the lead here. But in addition to this, the Saros has an auto detergent dispenser rather than having to mix it in with the water yourself, which is another tick for making this more intervention free. So that's pretty much all of the main differences between them all. There are, of course, a ton more minor differences, but to go through every single one would probably require 3 separate episodes, so I've kept the comparison to the core functionality not to overload you, and as not to create an episode longer than the extended Lord of the Rings. But there's one last thing that we've got to discuss, obviously, and that is the price, because this is what makes them differ even more. Now, just going off the RRP, at the entry level, we've got the QV35S, which sits at $699. There's a big asterisk here, so just bear with me. The QRevo Curve S5X has an RRP of $999 and the Saros 10, the most premium robot, it has an RRP of £1,499. So none of these could be considered cheap for sure. And too right, because the entry-level option, the QV35S, still has some extremely current hardware. And going back to a year ago, you'd have paid 4 figures for this type of hardware. But as for the asterisks, these are the RRP prices. The actual price at the time of writing this review was far, far cheaper in some of the cases. In some of the cases, you were looking at nearly 50% cheaper. That might have something to do with the upcoming Black Friday sale. So if it is, don't expect them to be as cheap as they are right now. But if you want to take a look at them for yourselves and find out the current price of all 3, which I strongly advise you probably should do, just in case they're still available at the price I've just seen them available for, then I will leave a link in the description below and drop the QR code here for you so you can whip out your phones, scan that, and go straight to the website. Now, I want to know which one of these you think will be most suitable for you and why. So do let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on the robot range as a whole as well. And if I've helped you decide which Roborock you should get, then I would love for you to return the favour and hit that thumbs up button. But to bring this episode to some kind of conclusion and to answer the question about which one you should get, well, it's quite clear that although, yes, there is a price to consider when looking at which one to go for, each one still has some very distinctive features that makes it stand out. The 35S is the most budget friendly, and despite that fact, it's still got some great technology in it. I'd go for this model if I wanted to save some pennies, but still have a great experience at a reasonable price. The Curve is a great mid-range product. It's slightly more expensive, but it's got some great advancements over the 35S. They make it a deal breaker for people who need hair being dealt with, so it's absolutely worth that increase in price. It also helps with floors with a slightly more robust mop washing system too, which is important if you've got pets or kids who like to trample mud and detritus through the house 24/7. But the Saros is obviously the favourite when it comes to the pure technology inside it, and it's the most advanced of all of them. Sure, it's the most expensive, but you've got arguably the best technology of the three, and again, it comes with some distinctive edges over the others when it comes to traversing the terrain, with its sinkable nav hat compared to the other two, and detachable mop to save your rugs. Add all of these to all the other advanced features it has over the other two, it's easy to see why it's top of the range. So if you've got a desire for the cleanest possible house whilst wanting the absolute best that Roborock offers, then the Saros 10 is absolutely the one to go for.